Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zobrio University's webinar on MIP data entry tools and tips. Today we have Kathy Dwyer, a senior application consultant here at Zobrio, to lead the webinar. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat, which is located at the bottom of your screen. We will go over all questions at the end. Thank you, and I will now hand over hosting to Kathy.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Colleen, and good morning, all. This is our second Zobrio University where we've all been under quarantine, I guess. So thank you for participating. Kind of what the goal of this Zobrio University is show you some, not any earth-shattering discoveries here, but to review some of the tips and tricks that are available in MIP that might make your data entry go a bit quicker, smoother, and maybe even some tricks that make data entry really automated in a sense. So as I get going, I think the first thing that I want to show you here is up under organization. There is this function called organization preferences. And depending on your security, you may or may not see this function. But let me just point out a couple of things here. First of all, on this first tab, which is processing, there's this little checkoff box here on the left that says Enable Document ID Control. And if that's checked off, what that will allow you to do is on certain jobs, like, and I'll use the journal vouchers as an example, is if you're entering a journal entry and you get to the point on the screen where it says enter a journal voucher number, much like you can hit the plus sign to have the system assign you a session number, you can hit the plus sign at the voucher field, and what it will do is look at a table and assign you the next available number. Okay. That works as long as this Enable Document ID Control is checked off. And while we're in here, let me also show you here is these two tabs of session and document number. I'm going to click on the document number tab, and basically what you'll see here is different horizontal lines for the different entry types that are available in your MIP software. And focus towards the bottom with the journal vouchers. And what's happening here is the system's basically telling us that the last journal voucher that was used or entered was number 1014. Okay. Now, let me show you the significance of that, or what that can do for you is, I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of the organization information. Okay. And what you'll see here is we're in MIP under basic transactions. And what I'm going to do is go to enter journal vouchers. Okay. And I'll do the standard plus sign to get the system to assign me a session ID. Okay. And I'm going to purposely leave the description field blank. Even though it's not required, I like to encourage people to use that field. But for my example, I'm going to leave it blank. I'm going to go ahead and hit the Start button. Okay, and here we are up to the voucher field. Okay, now with the voucher field, which is another way of saying maybe journal entry number, what I can do is if I hit the plus sign, what the system does, because that enabled document ID control is checked off, it goes out to that table that I just showed you. It says, okay, the last number that was used was 1014. I will give you 1015. Okay, so again, not big shakes there, not a huge big deal, but it's a way to allow the system to assist you in document number assignments. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about this icon here, which is basically called our entry defaults. Okay. And entry default is pretty handy in the sense that, and let me go ahead and click on it, is you can fill in a default value for any one of these fields, whether it be a date, which the document date is at the top of the screen, as opposed to if you kind of read down in the table, there's a horizontal line called line effective date. The effective date is technically the date that your transaction posts to the general ledger. So you can have a different date versus a different effective date, but just know that the effective date is really the ruler. It's what controls the hit to your general ledger. Okay. So to kind of demonstrate these entry defaults, I basically said, well, let's put in a document description. Let's put in an effective date, line effective date, and a line description, just to kind of demonstrate what it's doing. Can you use these other fields like the segments that make up your chart of accounts? Absolutely. Okay. But you will notice is with the document description, say it's just simply Kathy testing, notice the orange striped at the top, it automatically filled in Kathy testing. Okay. As we know, let me go ahead and say okay to that. If I hit the icon with the I, which takes us back to the session information, if I had put a description at the session level, that description automatically carries down to the document description, which can then also filter down to the line item description. But with the entry defaults, it's filled in the description for me, and if I come down here and basically select a fund number, that's when it's going to fill in the line description, which I simply called a commitment, just to differentiate some wording. And as I scroll to the right, you'll see the effective date is automatically loaded in 5/1/2020, which is different from the date at the top of the screen. And that all happened, again, because I used this icon for entry defaults. So that basically defaults can be used on different transactions. The entry defaults for person A can be different from entry defaults for person B. For person A, you can have entry defaults for journal vouchers and a different set for things like accounts payable or invoices. So it has a good degree of flexibility there. Okay. Now, what can also happen in here as we're entering transactions is you can use something called a distribution code. And let me go ahead and delete this line just to kind of give you an idea of what distribution codes are. This icon at the top is just to the left of the money bag, is the distribution maintenance. And let me open that up just to show you what possibilities distributions can do for you. And I'm going to pick on one that says general distribution. Okay. And the idea with the distribution code is if you have maybe a set dollar amount that instead of posting to a single account, it gets allocated out by, in this example, are percentages. You can set up a distribution code which basically says if based on the dollar amount that I enter on this journal entry or based on a amount I enter on an invoice, that distribution code can take that one value that you entered and allocate it out to the different general ledger accounts based on the percentages built in this table. Now, let me hit close here. Okay. It will take us back to our journal screen. And the difference is I did hit the distribution code information, which is basically the maintenance of the distribution code. If I want to apply a distribution code or actually create one here, I hit the icon back over to the left, which is Use Distribution Code. The system will ask us which particular distribution code you want, and you can have any number of these. I'll go ahead and pick General. And what you'll see here is because we have the entry default set at commitment and an effective date, I'll go ahead and leave that there, just to show you how, again, the system can help you with your data entry. And keep in mind with the distribution codes, they impact all segments of your GL string, if you will, with the exception of the GL itself, which is usually like your revenue number or your expense number. It can be, assets, liabilities, anything. Okay. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna just go ahead and pick a number. It might be a little nonsensical, the distribution, but I'm really illustrating how it works. And let's keep it simple. We'll have a nice round number, $1,000, and we're creating allocations or distributions based on the debit side as opposed to the credit side of our tier account. So let me go ahead and say okay. Now, what that did, which makes this kind of handy if you see a use for it, is instead of sitting down and entering 8, 9 entries here, I entered one. It took the $1,000, and you'll see that lower bottom of the screen, and it actually distributed it out to all these individual accounts based on the percentages, I can't say the word, that were associated with that distribution code. So that's kind of a bit of a handy function to make a lot of entries quickly. And again, think of it as it doesn't have to be restricted to just journal entries. There's actually a way to do this with your accounts payable, those people that are entering revenue. It can be used throughout the system. Now, let me go ahead and just undo this. Same rules apply, by the way, too, of course, is we could save the entry, which should generate the offsets, or we can hit the flag to make offsets, which actually, it might be a good point for me to mention this is up under our Options tab, there is this Customize Workstation Settings. Okay. And this, again, is by individual login. And there's a lot of good stuff here that helps with your data entry as well. Okay. The one that I always say to people is really almost a must is this one about halfway down here on our Preferences tab that talks about apply offsets on save and post. And what's kind of handy about that is the system will generate, like for instance, you're entering an invoice, it's going to automatically generate the offset to your accounts payable account. If you're entering revenue, it's going to make an offset to your cash account. So it's rather than you having to enter the credit side to your debit transactions or vice versa, automatic offsets, when you hit your save button, the system goes ahead and applies those offsets for you. Others that is kind of handy here is something I'm going to demonstrate here in just a minute is at the top of this list where it says Save Form Layout. That's always a good box, I think, to have checked off because if you look at your data entry grid and you ever wish that, geez, I wish this field was to the left, perhaps as opposed to the right side of the screen, I'm going to show you how you can move those columns. And if your Save Form Layout is checked off, then what ends up happening is it's going to have a memory. It's going to remember that you moved that column. And when you come back into the job, whether it's later today or tomorrow or a week from now, it's going to remember that screen setting. And then probably the other one that I'm kind of like here is again, about 3/4 the way down. Use your Enter key to move between fields. Sometimes if you're a person that's really more efficient on the keyboard, which I think from an accounting perspective, you're entering lots of numbers and transactions. Keyboard is a bit more efficient than keyboard, mouse. Well, if you activate the Enter key, it kind of has a nice flow if you're working on your numeric keyboard pad, because your Enter key is right there with your little pinky finger. Okay. So just a couple things there. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind too is let me go ahead and say undo to this transaction and confirm it, is do keep in mind also with your data entry is, and let me just go pick something here and get us started with an entry, is, that's fine. Entry. Other things that you can do from a keypad or keyboard perspective is your F6 key. Okay. When you hit that, it has the ability to auto-dupe the whole line above it. So if you're entering something that has repetitive entries, even if it's just a single value that you need to change, sometimes it's quicker to use the F6, which again auto-dupes the whole previous line. The F5 key, on the other hand, just auto-dupes the one cell that you're in. Okay. So sometimes, depending on the size of your segment, sometimes it's easier to hit a single key to auto-dupe what's above it. And what I'm doing here is I highlighted that line, and I'm going to just hit the delete key. And I have my workstation preference. When I hit delete, it asks me to confirm. But kind of a couple things there. F6 auto-dupes the line. F5 auto-dupes the field above it. Also keep in mind, too, is sometimes rather than always mouse keyboard, is a shift will move you forward and a shift tab can move you back through fields. Okay, so tab forward, shift tab can move you backwards. Okay. So just a couple of tricks there on the normal data entry. Okay. Let me go ahead and undo this entry, and I'll confirm that. Okay. Now, while I'm in here, let's just talk about the moving of columns as well. Okay. If I get down here in the grid section of the screen, in other words, I've entered in the document information at the top, and I might look at this screen and say, you know what, I'd prefer perhaps to have the description field to appear after the debit and credit columns. Okay. I can left-click the column title description, and what I really want to get is if you can see it just below the mouse pointer, there's like a little square box that indicates that I've got it, I've grasped it. And see as I move to the right, kind of the separator between the fields goes from a black to kind of a red arrow, or excuse me, a red line. Okay, that indicates if I left-clicked and I'm holding it and I'm dragging to the right, if I drop it, that it kind of indicates that I put it in between those two fields. So let me do that again. Left-click, I got my little square box, I move to the right, and again, the red kind of gives us an indication where it's going to drop that column down to. Okay? And you don't have to go one column at a time, drop, drag, drop, drag, drop. You can drag it straight across and drop it anywhere you want. And again, as long as we have what we saw under the organization preferences, as long as we have, and excuse me, I'm wrong there. As long as we have under our options, and let me show you that again, options and customize workstation settings, as long as we have the save form layout checked off, then the grid is going to, the system's going to remember who I am and how I configured this screen, and the next time we come back in, we're good to go. It's going to be remember our setting, and we're not going to have to rearrange and move our columns around at all. Now, again, I guess I'm picking on the journal voucher screen a little bit here today to demonstrate some functions, but let's jump out of here for just a moment, and I'm going to tell it not to bother to save any of those entries, and bring us back out here to the menu. Now, also, sometimes a little known and maybe underused function of data entry, and this really relates to your vendors and maybe entering invoices here, is if I go up under Maintain and I go to Vendors, okay, we get our grid of vendors. And what I'm going to do is grab ABC at the top here just to open up to demonstrate a few things. Probably first and foremost here is with our Payment and Terms tab. Okay. Sometimes I'll get a question that says, geez, I'd like to print 2 checks. You know, I've maybe 2 invoices for the same vendor, but I'd like to have 2 separate checks. By default, MIP wants to combine invoices by vendor to produce a single check. You can, and this can be on an individual vendor basis, come in here and hit the box for print separate checks for each invoice, and that will force basically for each invoice per vendor will create multiple checks. There's also kind of a little unknown fact too about the system is if you're printing AP checks and you select to print those in data entry order, and you happen to say, okay, I'm going to enter a check for ABC, and then your data entry was ABC, and then XYZ, and then back to ABC, that also forces multiple checks. Okay. Entry order on the checks printing those is not real popular, but thought I'd point that out. Okay. If for any reason you're having problems with a vendor and you want to put them on hold, there is this little button or box for hold payments. That doesn't mean you can't enter an invoice for the vendor, but as you go to select for pay, the system will pop up a message and say, oops, wait a minute, this vendor's on hold. What do you want to do here? Moving on over to the default coding box. Okay. If you have a vendor that all the time or most of the time they're charged off against the same expense account, you can add that account right here on the top field. Okay. It doesn't mean that you can't override it when you're actually entering the invoice, but it's just, again, if 9 times out of 10 it's always charged against, say, this 57001 account, you can enter that here, and it will save you a little time when you're doing data entry, literally entering that invoice. Likewise, if you see that a benefit to using the distribution codes and a certain vendor is always, their invoice is always distributed based on percentages, and the dollar amount might fluctuate from one check run to another, but the percentages remain fixed, you can establish this a distribution code. And what you'll see is again, very similar to what we saw on the journal entry screen. This icon on the upper left is how you get in and maintain that distribution code. And then finally, what I wanted just to mention here in the vendor file is on the 1099 information tab, the way this impacts the data entry on your invoices is first and foremost in the upper left, if your vendor is coded as 1099, and then about halfway down the screen you specify what type of 1099 this vendor is their default is, and in this case 1099 miscellaneous, and the different boxes on this form. Okay. The way that impacts the system is this. Let me go ahead and hit close. I'm not going to save anything. Okay. I'm going to come on over here and basically get in the right spot. Go to Accounts Payable, enter AP Invoices, get us a session number, and hit Start. I'll pick a vendor, and fill in the required information. Once I get to the vendor and I pick vendor ABC, okay, what happens is the program does look up the vendor. It says, oh, okay, you're a 1099 miscellaneous vendor. Okay. You can override that down here. Notice in the grid, because the system saw that this is a vendor subject to 1099, it adds right in the center there a column called 1099 box. If you happen to have a vendor that is a combination of, sometimes maybe it's 1099 miscellaneous, sometimes it's 1099, maybe other income, this is where you can override that on an individual purchase-by-purchase basis. You can either say, you know what, this is a reimbursement, and even though 99% of their payments are subject to 1099, you can say not this one. Okay, so you can basically say non-applicable. Now, just let me tell you, too, an aside to this is probably a lot of you know that the 1099 miscellaneous form is being changed by the government starting here in calendar 2020. I am, and we all are, just waiting tight for MIP to release some new software that basically allows us to make that change. I believe the 1099 miscellaneous is now going to be called a 1099 NEC for non-employee compensation. But my goal is to, as soon as MIP comes out with the software, is to really get it documented and release it out to all the clients and let you know what's going to be required as far as changing the vendor file, etc. But we should have more detail on that soon. Okay, so basically that's kind of what I wanted to go over today. So just some, again, not earth-shattering, but some ideas of how you may use the system a little differently to get data in, and that's really what we wanted to discuss. So I really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. My name is it's Kathy with a K, Dwyer, D-W-Y-E-R, at Zobrio.com. And if I can answer any questions, I'd be happy to do that.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. A recording of this webinar will be made available shortly.